So I still remember the film sessions from my high school basketball days where we'd be all sitting in the coach's office in the dark and he'd put the tape in, and then for 90 minutes we'd be watching. He'd stop and start, point out every mistake we made. It was painful. I dreaded it. And then I went off and got into coaching myself, and I swore I wouldn't recreate that experience for my players. In fairness, I didn't. I was probably a little more intentional. I'd clip specific plays, had huddle and stuff like that made it easier to do. And I tried to really emphasize, hey, I'm not here to call you out. I'm here just to help you learn and get better from your mistakes. But if I'm really honest, I probably just shortened that 90-minute experience that my coach created for us to just 10 to 15 minutes. And it was ineffective. In my last coaching stint at the semi-pro level in 2020, I tried a drastically different approach. I remember after our team's first game, I sent the team just three possessions where we executed our system well. That's all I could find. That's the three things that I shared with them. Game 2, I think it was probably around 8 possessions. Game 3, 15 possessions. I wanted to reinforce what was done well rather than teach through showing them their mistakes, what they didn't do well. It was effective, more so than before. I know that. Yet, even after that COVID shortened season, I knew I still had so much more to learn about film. And then after talking with today's guest, Eoin Roche, I realized just how much more I need to learn and how little I know. Eoin is a Coach-Analyst with a master's in sports performance analysis. He's an accredited performance analyst and coach with the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association in Ireland. And he brings 12 years of experience coaching inter-county hurling teams from under 14s to senior level, alongside 5 years of providing analysis for various inter-county and club teams. Now, for context on where Eoin coaches, for many of our listeners in North America and Australia, this is going to be a little new. In Ireland, Eoin coaches Gaelic hurling, and Gaelic football and hurling are the two primary sports run through the Gaelic Athletic Association. All right, now they're not just Ireland's most popular sports. The GAA is a defining institution, right? It's built on an amateur model where players represent their local clubs, and if they're truly exceptional, their county. And I literally just attended the All-Ireland football final in Dublin yesterday, where there was over 88,000 fans in attendance, and the whole country's watching. You've got Irish people all over the world watching, and you watch these athletes perform at an incredibly high level, right? High performance. And you're seeing their dedication and sacrificing, and you can feel what it means to them and their counties. And at the end of the day, like you just can't believe it that they're actually amateurs, right? Because Monday morning though, like they're back at their jobs as teachers and nurses or whatever else they do for a living. So it's an incredible sport. It's an incredible institution. And I kind of mentioned that because whether it's Eoin or previous guests that we had on, Eamon Devlin, who's from Northern Ireland, you can sense the incredible spirit of this amateur sport. Like this matters for you, the coach, the listener, though, I think because, the time constraints faced by amateur players and coaches are probably more realistic than most of the professional teams that we sometimes talk about or feature on the podcast. And I think they have a lot of lessons to teach us about optimizing impact with limited time, especially when you talk about film, because you could spend so much time on film. Now, in part one of our conversation with Eoin, we're going to unpack the essentials of film analysis, whether for your team or for scouting. In part two, we're going to dive into how you tailor your coaching approach to really meet the athlete's needs, building relationships that make them more receptive to feedback. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman, and I'm joined today by my co-host Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. It's the TOC Weekly Newsletter. And there's a link in the details of this episode, or you can do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick. Welcome, Eoin. Happy to have you on the podcast. This has been a long time coming. I'm going to start off today just with a question to kind of give our listeners a bit of a background into you, who you are as a coach. And I'm just curious if you could share just why are you coaching? hurling in the GA in Ireland? You're obviously a big sports person. You love sports, but what drew you into the hurling? And where's your passion really come from there?
What drew me into it is it's family, community, stuff like that. My family would be a hurling family. My dad, I'm one of 5 boys in a family, so we all would have hurled all the way up. So through secondary school, high school, through college, stuff like that. What got me into coaching was when you were in second year in college. Part of it was you take the freshman team, so you'd be part of the coaching ticket for that. So that's what got me into coaching. Started that when I was in second year in college back in the 90s and kind of progressed there. And hurling was always my game. I played at a medium level, so never really reached the heights of intercounty. So there was always that want to achieve and to kind of, prove yourself in another field. And coaching was that avenue as well. So between the love of the game and my relationship with my family and stuff like that, and through college, that's how I got into coaching. So that's where my journey started.
Yeah, there's that love of like the game, as well as this, maybe you didn't feel like you achieved what you wanted to as a player. So you've really dug into the coaching, and you're, I know you well, like you're someone that's constantly looking for, how can I be better? How can we do things better? You went and got your master's in sports performance analysis. That learning aspect seems to be a really important aspect for you as a coach.
Yeah. Early on, I wouldn't have been overly academic in my early life and stuff like that. I'm a police officer by trade, went into that after a couple of years in college, didn't really progress college that much. But then as life went on and you get older and you get more understanding of life and you get more sensible, you realize that, to achieve anything, you need to educate yourself in what you're doing, and you need to fully encompass what's going on around you. And I felt that educating myself in an aspect of the sport so I could be better at it. And as it transpired, the master's in sports performance analysis actually improved my coaching as much as anything else. So it actually worked in tandem.
Yeah, and you talk about your role in coaching. That's kind of evolved. Like I think there's a lot of different types of coaching roles today, whether you're English football or football, international football, or you're American football, basketball in the States, Aussie rules. I mean, there's just so many different sports internationally, and it seems like every country has a different way of setting up what coaches do within the coaching team to be able to maximize and drive their team's performance. And I thought it'd be really worthwhile for you to kind of explain how you see your role when it's like ideally within a team. How do you operate within this coach-analyst role?
Yeah, there's obviously, you separate the two. I've obviously worked as a coach, just playing coaching, and I've worked with a couple of teams just as the analyst. But I find in the best situation, I'm doing both. So no offense to any analysts out there, they're all very important and they all do a job. But I find it easiest and less Chinese whispers, less stuff lost in translation if I'm doing both roles. So you play your game on your Saturday or Sunday. I then take responsibility of analyzing that. I identify what has gone right, what has gone wrong in a game. I'm then able to present to both management and players. And then I'm able to take the next step and I'm able to take that to the pitch straight away. So I get feedback from the management and the other coaches. Obviously, definitely we interact with the numbers, the data, what I find, the film, what I find, of course we do. But then I have it clear in my head what I want to put on that pitch on a Monday or Tuesday or whenever we get back onto a pitch. Then you can implement what you've learned from the analysis and put that into place then on the next game day.
Well, and let me ask you this question. When it comes to the use of film, and I come from a basketball background, we obviously are watching film all the time. We're showing film on our opponents for every game. We're learning from our own film. There's a lot there, right? And I guess I want to start with this. Why can't we just turn on the film and sit with the team and kind of watch the game through and expect them to be able to learn from just having the game on?
Yeah, in an ideal world, and you could have your conversations and you could interact, and that would be brilliant. In my world, unfortunately, GA is an amateur organization. Everyone that plays our sport is working. It's their, what you call it, it's their pastime, it's their hobby. So what you have to do is you have to look at that and look at your access points as well. You know, if you're from an urban area like Dublin, everybody's about 30, 35 minutes away from their training base, which you can meet up regularly. But if you're from, let's say, a country club, you could have fellas living and working in Dublin. You could have fellas living and working in Cork, all the major urban towns. So they could be 2.5, 3 hours away from your base. So for that to meet up the whole time in my sport it's not practical. It can't be done. And then if you break that down and put that into sharp meetings and stuff like that, it can be a lot easier. Then you also have to look at, if you put whatever's on your roster, whatever's on your team, there's going to be 35 to 40 individuals. They're all different. You'll have some individuals that could sit there for that hour and a half or 2 hours and be able to soak up that information. But then you're going to have a lot of people in that room that do not want to be there. So we have all different ways of learning, different ways of taking stuff on, and you have to find the happy medium. You have to find the highest common denominator, who's your high functioning person that can really dig in, and he's the person that leads your meetings and stuff like that. But you also have to get to your lowest common denominator, that person that's looking out the window, that person that's losing the concentration, that person that just doesn't get technology or doesn't get footage, but you still have to try and get through to him or her at the best possible way. And I don't think, as coaches, we'd love to do that, to sit down in a room and spend 2 hours or 2.5 hours and go, stop that, replay that, why did we do that, use our questions, all that. But I just don't think it can be done with the roster, with the size of a group and the different people that are in that group, and also practically. Definitely in my sport, even I do college sport as well. And in that college environment, you've lecturers, you see, they're not, we don't have full access to them in our colleges. We have to work around. Our college comes first, our academic comes first. So we have to work around that. So we have to find times to be able to do that with them even.
Your role as an analyst, you mentioned you watch the performance, you figure out what went wrong, what went right. You help use that to obviously plan your next practice sessions, training sessions. One of the things I think that is challenging for coaches is you look at a film, you know, again, a basketball game's 32 minutes long. There's probably 120 possessions at both ends of the floor. There's a lot there that we could pick on. You know, there's a lot of mistakes that are made over the course of a 32-minute basketball game. There's a lot of plays that may have gone well. But as you said, we have limited amount of time, limited amount of attention, limited amount of engagement when we're having conversations on film. So just from an analyst perspective first, before we even get the team involved, how do you sift through what's most important to be able to address with your team?
Well, that's the question for the coach. What's important to you? So we all set out at the start of a year, or set out of we all have our pillars. We all have our principles of play. And if we look at those principles of play, whether it's the transition of the ball, whether it's our tackling or turnovers, if we look at those principles of play, we can't look at everything. So when we analyze a game and we bring that back to, let's say, what we try to do, what we try to impose in the game, and if we can identify through that and use the common language and use the things that we've agreed on from the start of the year. And that's why it's helpful being the coach and the analyst, because I'm not using other people's words. I'm using my words and the team's words when I have done the analysis and when I'm feeding that back to the players. So all the stuff that we've worked on the pitch, whether it's a transition play, whether it's a turnover play, whether it's a power play, whatever that is, I'm using those terms with the players, and I've identified those things in the analysis, and I can filter out, okay, there's a lot of stuff, and some stuff you go back to. You might see a trend after a couple of weeks and say, okay, we didn't deal with that on whatever game day it was, or championship match it was, what round it was. Okay, we might have to go back and revisit that and build it into the next couple of games that we've looked at. But for the moment, these are what we're looking at. This is what we set out to achieve before the game.
I know I've made the mistake of being that coach that just tries to just identify what seemed to be most important that game. I haven't come back to my principles of play or my pillars like you talked about that. That's definitely one mistake, and it's easy to get caught up in. And when you do that, you're just swapping and changing. There's a lack of consistency in the message to players and to what you're working on. And then you look back at the end of the season, you go, my God, we try to be great at everything, instead of what we said from the beginning. When you think about now, a coach has those things that they're looking at, or yourself like that in your analysis, and you look at those things. Now you come and you sit down into a film session. And I think a lot of coaches can recognize that probably all of our players feel like the lowest common denominator points when it comes to attention span today. Like very few people can you keep their attention for more than 15, 30 minutes in a film session. What are some things that you see coaches do, or you've seen people do in film sessions that you just go, oof, we need to stay away from that? And what are some really simple ways to start to try to engage players in film sessions so that they can actually really take in what you're trying to teach them?
I'll start with the positive ones first, the stuff that I find works and engages the players, involving the players. Players want to be involved. Players also find that they then have ownership of what they're doing. If you involve the player in, and look, it can't happen overnight. This is not something, okay, you start with a team on Monday, okay, I'm going to get John, Peter, and Paul to present on Tuesday. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to identify who your key players are, who your players that can actually have the capability to present into a group. You also don't want to put a person who's uncomfortable presenting in front of a group in that situation, because that can be detrimental too. You can use it as a tool sometimes to get someone out of their comfort zone, to get them to interact. If you've got a quiet guy in a field and he's not communicating with people around you, this could be a tool to get him out of that. But you have to feel the room and feel the time is right for him and feel the time is right for the group for him to present. Going back to being able to present, the players presenting, it can take time, and there could be a couple of misfires. There could be a couple of sessions presenting that doesn't go well, and you kind of have to scaffold it for them. What I find is if you not helicopter parent it, but scaffold it in such a way, you give them the teams, you give them the kind of the pointers, and then you build around that and you build your presentation around that. That can be very, very beneficial, because when the peers are presenting to their other peers in a group, that's powerful. And if it's done properly, it can be really, really beneficial. The negatives, the amount of feedback I've got from players over 12 years of coaching is too long in a meeting room. Too long. They want to play. And I suppose every sport is different, and our sport it's in its infancy in using video analysis, stuff like that. There isn't a massive culture in it. So I get that. Other players are well used to it. I know even in Gaelic football, even in under the same umbrella as the GAA, Gaelic footballers do spend a little bit more time in meeting rooms, in video analysis rooms. But from my sport, they find the length of it. Also, it's the carrot and the stick. A lot of coaches love using the stick. They love going after the negative play. They love going after, see that's what I told you not to do. And you're using the negative words, you're using the negative film, and sometimes you've got to do that to illustrate the point, but it's knowing to get the balance right and get the balance between the positive stuff and the negative stuff, and knowing when you can see it in players' faces when you're scanning the room, when you're doing that, whether you've actually hit your point in what you're trying to achieve or whether you've really beat down on them. And you'll know then from your interactions with them whether you have kept them engaged or you've lost them. Also in that situation, question, the power of question. Doing underage, development squad, academy level stuff here. I'd show a clip and then ask the question of the clip. and then not be afraid of the silence. So that can be valuable, because you will get someone then that will, okay, you see a couple of them, they don't like the silence. You don't like the silence as a presenter, and someone will add. And then once you get the ball rolling, they'll all contribute.
Yeah, there's so many things in there that are worth pulling back, because I think they're not just maybe teaching or coaching, they're like leadership, in the sense that like engaging the players, instead of being the sage on the stage, you're bringing in them and giving them opportunities. That's giving up some sort of control as well, and it going exactly the way that you want it. Less time is better. We just, in the previous episodes, we had Eamon Devlin on the podcast from Minute 9 talk about at halftime talks to players, right? Like less is better, right? Less time, less points, right? He even challenged coaches like 1 point at halftime. And then you're talking about avoiding the negatives. It's so easy, I think, as coaches to feel like if we don't address the turnovers in that game and we don't call it out on film, then we're saying that's okay, rather than just trying to focus on what we did well and reinforcing that. And then you even talk about the use of questions and silences. And I think that is a very difficult space for coaches to be in there. What are good questions? And then if it's a good question, it's probably going to take time for people to actually think about it. Right. So there's a lot in those things. When you think about that, now you try to translate that, and you say the pitch, which for Americans means the field, right? Or a coach is taking it to the ice or the field or the court, wherever it be. Now, how do you start to get that transfer of what you're trying to teach them in a film session actually out into practices?
What you do is what I do, is I use the film to make the illustration of what went well, what didn't go well. So I use the film, but I also use tactical pad and other visual aids to illustrate what we're trying to achieve on it. I'll share all, so they'll see the film, then they'll see the tactical pad stuff of the exercise or the condition game that we're going to play on the pitch. So they have an idea before they ever get to the field of what we're actually going to do. So when we get to the field, the explaining is less and the doing is more. So they have the visual of the actual video footage. They have the tactical pad video or footage as well. And then we get to the pitch. Now, it might take a walkthrough every now and then to get it to work. It might take one of the players to actually step out and observe. I know from using an injured player one time, a really high-end injured player who was out for a season, I use him to observe to make sure things were running smooth, especially with kick out, puck out defense, observing that, and then coming in and not being afraid to stop stuff to be able to talk about it. And there is obviously getting that balance between talking and getting your point across and getting feedback from the group, and taking too much time out of that and not doing enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How do you know what's the right amount of time in that? Do you have any principles that help guide you in that bit?
I don't have anything exact, but again, it's using the questions in that time period and using engagement even from the other coaches that might be observing. They might be the lead coach and that, using them for a little bit of engagement. Okay, how did that look to you? Maybe asking them, then engaging with the players and seeing are they hitting the points that you're looking for. So if it's completely gone off topic, if it's not what you're looking for, trying to refocus that and get that back in, you'll know it. I suppose coaches have instinct too when they're in a huddle and knowing when you've reached that point of you need to get back out there and go again. I think it's very hard to put a time frame on it.
Mm. What do you do as a coach, though, when you ask a question? You talk about what, and you're maybe hoping or looking for this type of answer, but the player's perspective is very different than yours. How does a coach work with that? Because I think that sometimes frustrates people to ask questions, which is, well, they're not getting it, but they is there something in that perspective that you actually might find valuable as well too, I guess?
Of course, because their opinion, and they have to, and you, this is where their opinion matters. If you, and this is where you can lose players. If you put down what they've said, if you completely disregard it, you could lose them. They've obviously said it for a reason. You know, okay, we all have that one or two people in the group that mightn't be tuned into what's going on, and you have to allow for that. But you have to gauge then for your top, if a top end player comes back with something completely off point, or a middle ground player comes with something completely off point, you also have to look inward and kind of go, look, have I explained this properly? Have we walked through it properly? Am I getting the right point? So you question yourself. You also, I found in certain setups and certain styles, players will come up with a different view, looking inward at themselves and their own capabilities. We had a half-back one time who wasn't blessed with pace. So when you'd suggest something, he'd always be protecting that in his head. But you have to take that into account too. If you're trying to do a certain type of puck out or a certain type of play, and it's not suiting him, he's identifying that, even though he's protecting himself. Yeah, fair. But you have to take that on board as well, that what you're trying to do mightn't suit the players that you have. So even though you might have an idea in your head, it mightn't suit the actual player.
So, Owen, what's the workaround there? Is there pre-work that has to be done so that when a player is looking at, a possession where there was a mistake and, the other team capitalizes on that, I don't want them to short circuit because they feel like it's personal. And yet at the same time, if we don't address it, we're going to continue to give up the same opportunities to our opponents. So how do you either prepare the player or prepare the room or prepare the film to try to take a little bit of the edge off so that they can engage it without necessarily getting triggered by that experience of watching it?
I'd often, if there was going to be a rough video session, I would give the individuals involved a heads up beforehand. I generally, if I'd gone through my analysis and kind of gone, okay, Paul hasn't had a good day today, you might have realized that post-game anyway. So, and what we would do, what I do in certain teams was you do your individual analysis in the 24 hours after the game. So the players themselves would pull their clips and share them with a certain coach. So that could have been addressed with the player-coach relationship ever before you got to the full meeting room. But if that hadn't happened, you'd have the word. Also, you'd have the caveat before every year, when you meet a team and you'd start doing video, you'd always put this out. Guys, this is not about kicking people. This is not about putting people down. This is about us learning. And if we don't show some of the negative, we're not going to learn. And unless we act on that negative, we're not going to learn. And it's nothing against anybody in the room. Some people are going to be picked some weeks because of obviously they're going to be involved in plays that are not going to go well. It's going to be somebody else's turn the next week. I know I'm not a big fan of it. I know some managements actually go after your higher end player to show them doing the negative and using that to really highlight it. Okay, we're not afraid to go after the top end players, and we'll show this kind of thing, and that's fine within their group. If that works for them, that's fine. But I find if you start doing that, then you're just looking for stuff. You pick the best clip to show the best example, not the individual that's in it at that time.
So one of the ways that we've done that, Owen, is really as we're integrating this, in, as you said at the beginning of the season, we're really trying to emphasize that we're trying to create a learning environment here. And we're going to learn from mistakes. We're also going to learn from successes. And I think if there's one thing that I think I've seen missing in, observing other people doing film, it's that they harp on the mistakes. We did this in practice. I told you to do this. Or their questions are, what the hell were you thinking when this happened? Rather than also understanding that there's value in looking at the positives, right? So you can show a missed coverage and you can show the same coverage when it's done correctly. and then ask, tell me what's the difference, and ask them to compare and contrast. There's lots of creative ways to do it. What's the value in showing positive examples? Because I think oftentimes that's missed in terms of, it's not just a highlight reel to make us feel better, right? Like there's lots of power in the positive example as well.
Yeah, definitely. Especially I find on defense and your structures on defense and what you're trying to achieve on defense. If you can show what you're trying to achieve, and if you can give the positive examples, and I have a debate with another analyst of mine, I'm very pro showing outcomes. So if you turn over the ball and this results in a score, it shows that what you have done from A, B, and C has resulted in the positive outcome of getting the turnover score, which I feel is very important. Now, his opinion on it is there doesn't always have to be a positive outcome from what you're trying to achieve. But I think all those things really reinforces your point of what you've been doing on the field for the few days beforehand, and giving the example of that having a positive outcome as well, I think goes bang, bang, bang.
Right, because you want to reinforce the idea, when we do this right, this is the result, right? And just from a psychological perspective, there's a building of confidence there that we can do this thing. See, here's the evidence that we can get it right. How do we do this more consistently, right? JP, let me ask him one more question here, because you brought this up earlier, the idea of the powerful question. And I think sometimes when coaches are, they've got a clip list of 20 possessions or 20 things that they want to look at, you're obviously not going to be able to engage in great detail over all 20 clips. You're going to be there forever. But what are some of the powerful questions that you might ask a team or an individual when you're watching film that go beyond just, what did we do wrong here, guys? What were we thinking here? How could we make this play after what we did in practice? What are good questions that coaches can put in their toolbox when they're watching film with their team?
3-letter word. Why? Why did we do this? Why? So when I'm doing individual feedback, and an example like that can be the 20 bits, 20 clips, and your man the player, he or her has picked out, I missed my touch. I didn't retain the ball. And the most engaging thing you can ask them, and the most triggering thing you can ask them to make them think, is why? Break it down. Look at it. What was your body position? Where were your hands? Where were you addressing the ball? Why didn't you retain it? The outcome, everyone can see the outcome. The outcome is there for everybody to see. I missed the shot. Okay, we can see the outcome. Why did you miss the shot? Where were your feet? Where were your hands? All those things. I think that is the most powerful thing you can do, is ask them why and get them to come back to you with why it happened.
And I'll just add one piece of this, and I apologize, JP, for nerding out on this, but I think another great question is, what did you see and what did you not see, right? Because when they're explaining why they did a thing or made a decision in particular, oftentimes if that decision wasn't what we wanted from them, usually it's because they didn't see something in their opponent or where their teammates were spacing or something like that. So even addressing the perception, when we can slow it down and we can watch it on film, helps to expand their ability to gather information in the field and then hopefully make better decisions moving forward.
Yeah, that is brilliant. Scanning in our game is so important.
All right, that's it for today's episode. Please be sure to tune in for part 2 of our conversation with Eoin Roche. You're not going to want to miss it, as he's going to go deeper into his work with athletes and how he's able to really personalize his coaching approach. If you found this podcast valuable, please leave us a review, and most importantly, share it with someone else who might find value in it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. It's our weekly newsletter. You can do that at tocculture.com.